I came from there wasn't much, and I'm willing to serve as a model, as a sign of hope for all of them.
Who was the best model for you?
The best model for me, I would have to say, mom and dad, and my older brother. And believe it or not, as much as I got it hard from my brother, I absolutely love him because he taught me how to work, especially in baseball.
The story of Pedro Martinez has a sad end. At least that is what the cameras wanted you to believe. For years, the images told a simple story. An angry man, a violent reputation, a career defined by controversy and fear. The headlines painted him as someone who lived by aggression and would be remembered for one terrible moment when he pushed down a 72-year-old man in front of millions of people. But in 2026, the truth is more complicated than any headline could capture. The dark reality of how Pedro Martinez lived was never about cruelty. It was about survival. And the way his story ends is not sad at all. It is about transformation. It is about a man who spent decades at war with the world and finally found peace. Before we go any further, if you want to help this story reach more fans who need to hear the real truth, hit the hype feature right now and give this video some hype. It genuinely helps more than you know. Thank you. Pedro Martinez is remembered for 3 Cy Young Awards and a World Series championship in 2004. Those are the accomplishments people celebrate, but the real story begins in a place most people never saw and would never understand. The fire on the mound, the stare that made hitters flinch before he even released the ball. The controversies that followed him like a shadow, the reputation as a headhunter who was not afraid to hit anyone. All of it traces back to one moment in October 2003 that he still regrets in 2026. A moment during Game 3 of the American League Championship Series. A 72-year-old bench coach named Don Zimmer charging at him in the middle of a brawl. Pedro grabbing Zimmer by the head, guiding him to the ground. The fall captured by every camera in the stadium. The image that turned a heated baseball rivalry into a national scandal. The moment when the world decided that Pedro Martinez was dangerous, that he was angry, that he was someone to fear. But by 2026, that same man is living a completely different life. He is a national broadcaster with a multi-year extension through 2028. He is a gardener who calls himself a farmer first. He is a gentle soul who raises over 1,000 chickens and numerous geese on his estate in the Dominican Republic. He grows roses as a tribute to his mother and her memory. He produces basically everything he eats on his own land because he wants organic food and control over his environment. He funds an education and sports campus that serves 1,700 children every single day in his hometown. He hosts a segment on TNT Sports where he reclaims the insult that once defined his rivalry with the New York Yankees. The anger is gone. The grimace is gone forever. The fire on the mound has been replaced by roses and dirt and livestock, and the quiet satisfaction of feeding his family from land he owns. The transformation is real and complete. The peace is earned, and the ending is not sad. To understand how that transformation happened, you have to go back to where it all started. You have to go back to Managuayabo. Managuayabo is a town 9 miles from Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic. In the 1970s and 1980s, it was a place where poverty was not just a statistic you read about. It was the air you breathed. It was the reality you woke up to every morning. It was inescapable. Pedro Martinez grew up in a tin roof home with dirt floors and no indoor plumbing. The walls were thin. The roof leaked when it rained. There was no privacy. No escape from the noise and the chaos and the constant awareness that your family was one bad month away from having nothing at all. His father, Paulino Jaime Abre, worked as a school janitor, long hours for little pay. His mother, Leopoldina, did domestic laundry work for other families. She washed clothes by hand. She carried water. She worked until her hands were raw. The money they earned was barely enough to keep food on the table. There was no room for extras, no room for dreams. The pressure that defined Pedro's childhood was simple and brutal. Win or starve. Sports were not a hobby. They were not a dream you chased for fun. They were the only currency that could lift a family out of the dirt, the only path to something better. Pedro was not like his brothers. He was sensitive in a way that did not fit the environment he was born into. While his brothers were loud and physical, Pedro was thoughtful. He studied in the branches of a mango tree because it was quieter than the chaos inside the house. He could focus there. He could think. He kept a private diary where he wrote down his thoughts and his fears and his hopes for the future. He was intellectual in a world that only rewarded physical results. But that sensitivity had to coexist with a brutal physical reality. There was no room for softness when survival was the question you faced every single day. The training Pedro received was not formal. There were no professional coaches. There was no equipment. There was no money for real baseballs or proper gloves, or any of the tools that kids in wealthier countries took for granted. So Pedro and his brothers, Ramon and Jesus, improvised with whatever they could find. They took the heads off their sisters' dolls and used them as makeshift balls. It is a disturbing image if you think about it. Children decapitating toys because they were desperate to practice a skill that might save their family. But that was the reality. They did whatever it took. They threw rocks across a ravine behind their house. Big rocks. Small rocks. Whatever they could find. They treated it like a long toss drill, decades before anyone in professional baseball called it that. Every throw was practice. Every throw was building arm strength and accuracy. Every throw was preparation for a future that felt impossible but necessary. Because failure was not just losing a game. Failure meant staying in Managuayabo forever. Failure meant dirt floors and tin roofs and watching your parents work themselves into the ground for nothing. At 13 years old, Pedro started tagging along with his older brother Ramon to the baseball academy. Ramon was already on a path toward professional baseball, and Pedro wanted to follow. He was smaller than the other kids, he was younger, but he had something they did not have, a desperation that could not be taught, a survival engine that ran constantly. A scout named Rafael Avila was at the academy one day and noticed something unusual about the youngest Martinez brother. The kid was already throwing around 80 miles per hour at 13, without any formal coaching, without proper equipment, without any of the advantages that other prospects had. That velocity was not talent. Or maybe it was talent, but it was talent forged in desperation. Pedro understood something that most kids his age did not understand. His right arm was the only tool that could change his family's future. It was the only thing that mattered. The pressure to succeed was not coming from coaches or scouts or anyone external. It was inside him. It was a weight he carried every day, a survival engine that never stopped running, a voice in his head that said, "You cannot fail. You cannot be ordinary. You have to be great or you have nothing." When Pedro entered professional baseball in the United States, that survival engine did not disappear. It evolved. It turned into armor, a defensive shield that he wore every time he stepped on the mound. Scouts doubted him from the beginning because of his size. He was 5'11" and 170 pounds. In an era when power pitchers were getting bigger and stronger, Pedro looked fragile. Scouts saw his frame and made assumptions. They assumed he could not handle the workload of a starting pitcher. They assumed his arm would break down. They assumed he was better suited for relief work, where he would only throw 1 or 2 innings at a time. Inside the Los Angeles Dodgers organization, where Pedro started his career, people openly questioned whether he was durable enough to be a long-term investment. That skepticism was not whispered behind closed doors. It was part of the conversation. And Pedro heard it. He absorbed it, and it fueled something dark inside him. He realized early that if he did not project an aura of absolute dominance and aggression, the industry would push him into a relief role or dismiss him entirely. He had to make them afraid. He had to make them believe that despite his size, he was more dangerous than anyone else on the field. So he built a persona designed to terrify hitters. The stare became one of his most famous weapons. Before he even released the ball, he would lock eyes with the hitter and grimace in a way that people described as a bulldog sucking a lemon. It was not a natural expression. It was calculated. It was psychological warfare. He studied hitters the way a predator studies prey. He learned their weaknesses, he learned what they were afraid of, and then he exploited those fears without mercy. When Pedro attacked the inner half of the plate, he was not just throwing pitches, he was sending a message. This zone belongs to me. If you crowd the plate, you will pay the price. If you lean in, I will move you back. If you think you can take my space, you are wrong. The headhunter reputation that followed him was, in his view, a necessary consequence of his refusal to let hitters dictate the terms of engagement. He believed the plate belonged to the pitcher. Any incursion by a hitter would be met with physical force. The era made it worse. The late 1990s and early 2000s were dominated by offense. Hitters were bulking up on strength programs. Some were using performance-enhancing drugs. Ballparks were being built smaller to increase home run totals and attract fans. The advantage had shifted dramatically toward offense. Pitchers were struggling to keep earned run averages below 4 or 5. Pedro refused to let that shift happen on his watch. He threw inside not because he hated hitters personally, but because he needed to reclaim territory. He needed to make sure that hitters understood there were consequences for crowding the plate. The philosophy was simple. Hitters should back down if they do not want to get hit. That was his rule. The plate was his, and if you challenged that, you would pay. It was the same aggressive philosophy that Ty Cobb used on the base paths decades earlier. Aggression was not a character flaw, it was strategy, it was survival. The dominance Pedro achieved between 1997 and 2003 was not just impressive, it was statistically absurd. It defied logic. In an era when earned run averages were inflating across the league, Pedro was operating in a different universe. In 1999, pitching for the Boston Red Sox, he went 23 wins and 4 losses with a 2.07 earned run average. That margin over the next best pitcher in the American League was 1.37. It was not just good, it was not just elite, it was otherworldly. He was so far ahead of everyone else that it looked like he was playing a different game. In 2000, his earned run average dropped even further to 1.74. Think about that for a moment. In one of the highest scoring eras in baseball history, when hitters were bigger and stronger and ballparks were smaller, Pedro Martinez had an earned run average under 2. Analysts still call it one of the greatest statistical anomalies in sports history. He was operating at a level several standard deviations below the league mean, while everyone else was posting numbers between 4 and 5. He was not just better, he was impossibly better. But here is the dark truth that nobody talks about. The cost of that dominance was brutal. By the late 1990s, Pedro was pitching through a stabbing sensation in his back after every single delivery. Every pitch hurt. Every inning was agony. Every game left him in pain that would last for days. The physical erosion happening inside his body was invisible to the fans in the stands and the analysts in the booth. All they saw was excellence. All they saw was a small pitcher dominating hitters who were bigger and stronger than him. What they did not see was the internal collapse, the price he was paying to maintain the facade of invincibility. Pedro pitched through pain that would have sidelined most people. He pitched through injuries that should have ended his career. He did it because stopping was not an option. Stopping meant weakness. Stopping meant failure. Stopping meant going back to Managuayabo. So he kept going. He kept throwing. He kept winning. And his body kept breaking down. The fire on the mound was real. The dominance was real. But so was the suffering. So was the cost. Every win came at a price that most people will never understand. And that price would follow him for the rest of his life. The controversies started piling up early in his career. The first major incident happened on April 13, 1994, when Pedro was pitching for the Montreal Expos. He was 22 years old. He was carrying a perfect game into the 8th inning against the Cincinnati Reds. Everything was going perfectly. He had retired every single batter he faced. The stadium was electric. And then he hit Reggie Sanders with a pitch. Sanders did not hesitate. He did not wait to see if it was intentional. He immediately charged the mound, assuming the pitch was meant to hurt him. The benches cleared. Players from both teams rushed onto the field. It was chaos, and in that chaos, a narrative was born. Pedro Martinez was dangerous. He was not afraid to hit hitters to achieve his goals. He was willing to use violence to protect his perfect game. The media ran with that story, and it stuck. Pedro's defense was simple and consistent. He was playing the game the way it was meant to be played. Hitters need to understand the rules. If you do not want to get hit, do not crowd the plate. Do not lean in. Do not try to take space that belongs to the pitcher. It was not personal. It was business. It was the same philosophy that aggressive players had used for decades. The plate belonged to him, and if you challenged that, there would be consequences. The incidents kept coming. On June 14, 1994, less than 2 months after the Sanders incident, Pedro hit Carlos Garcia of the Pittsburgh Pirates, leading off an inning. The benches cleared again. 6 players were ejected. The pattern was forming. Pedro was building a reputation as someone who would not back down. Someone who would not let hitters dictate the terms. Someone who was willing to use physical intimidation to control the game. On August 29, 2000, now pitching for the Boston Red Sox, Pedro hit Gerald Williams of the Tampa Bay Rays on the hand. Williams charged the mound immediately. More chaos, more ejections. The story was the same every time. Pedro was defending his territory. Hitters were challenging him, and he was responding with force. On July 7, 2004, in a game against the New York Yankees, Pedro hit both Alfonso Soriano and Derek Jeter. Both hitters had to go to the hospital. And here's the remarkable part. Pedro was not ejected. The umpires understood what was happening. This was not about malice. This was about a pitcher protecting the inside part of the plate in an era when hitters were trying to take it away. But the media did not care about context. They cared about the narrative. And the narrative was that Pedro Martinez was a headhunter who played dirty. Pedro never apologized for any of it. He stood by his philosophy. The controversies were not personal wars, they were about territorial integrity, about making sure hitters understood that there were rules, that the plate was not theirs to take, that if they wanted to crowd him, they would pay a price. It was calculated, it was strategic, and it worked. Hitters were afraid of him. They gave him space. They respected the inside corner. and that fear gave him an advantage that translated into dominance. But the biggest moment, the one that defines his regrets in 2026, happened during Game 3 of the 2003 American League Championship Series against the New York Yankees. The tension between the Red Sox and Yankees had been building for years. The rivalry was already intense, but that game took it to a different level entirely. It started with Pedro hitting Karim Garcia, then Roger Clemens, pitching for the Yankees, threw a pitch head-high at Manny Ramirez. The pitch was dangerous. It was meant to send a message. Ramirez reacted. The benches cleared. Players from both teams rushed onto the field. It was chaos, yelling, shoving, the kind of brawl that baseball had seen dozens of times before. Except this time was different. In the middle of that chaos, 72-year-old Yankees bench coach Don Zimmer charged at Pedro Martinez. Zimmer was not young, he was not fast, but he was angry. He came at Pedro with aggression, and Pedro's reaction was instinct. He grabbed Zimmer by the head. He guided him to the ground. The fall happened in front of every camera in Fenway Park, in front of millions of people watching on television, in front of the entire baseball world. The image was devastating. An elderly man on the ground, a young pitcher standing over him. The optics were terrible. The media portrayed it as an assault, as a young man attacking a defenseless senior citizen. The narrative wrote itself. Pedro Martinez was not just aggressive, he was dangerous. He was violent. He would hurt anyone, even a 72-year-old man, to win a fight. The backlash was immediate and brutal. Pedro received a $50,000 fine from Major League Baseball, but the real cost was not financial. The real cost was reputational. The image of Zimmer falling became the defining visual of Pedro's entire career. More than the Cy Young Awards, more than the World Series championship, more than the statistical dominance. That one moment, that one image became what people remembered. It fed a lasting perception of him as an angry young man who could not control himself, as someone who pushed down a defenseless senior citizen in the heat of a rivalry. In his reflections in 2026, Pedro calls it his only regret. Not the hit batters, not the controversies, not the brawls, just that one moment. He hates the label it created. He hates that people see that image and assume the worst about who he is. He has said publicly that it was pure instinct, that Zimmer charged at him and he reacted defensively, that he did not mean to hurt anyone, that it was not about cruelty, it was about self-preservation. What people often forget is what happened after. Don Zimmer later admitted publicly that he was foolish for charging Pedro. He apologized for his behavior. He took responsibility for starting the confrontation, but the image remained. The damage was done. Once the cameras label you, that label can stick forever. And for Pedro, that label felt like a prison. The angry young man. The dangerous player. The person who pushed down a 72-year-old man. That image became the blemish he wishes he could erase. The one moment he would take back if he could rewrite history. The New York media loved to amplify the narrative around Pedro. They gave him labels that stuck for years. One of the most famous was the Karate Kid. It was not just a reference to his small frame. It was also about the specialized martial arts style exercises he developed to maintain his arm strength and durability. Pedro famously worked his hands in barrels of rice to improve his grip and forearm strength. It was an effective training method that built the muscles in his hands and wrists in ways that traditional weight training could not replicate. But the media did not frame it as innovative training. They framed it as exotic, as different, as proof that Pedro was not like other pitchers. He was the other, the outsider, the villain with strange methods that set him apart from normal players. Then came the daddy taunt. It started after a particularly brutal loss to the Yankees. Pedro was frustrated. He was honest in a way athletes rarely are in post-game press conferences. He admitted that the Yankees were his daddy. It was a moment of vulnerability, a rare crack in the armor he had built over years of protecting himself from criticism. He was saying, in effect, that the Yankees had dominated him, that they had his number, that when the stakes were highest, he could not beat them. The New York fan base weaponized that admission immediately and mercilessly. For years afterward, whenever Pedro pitched at Yankee Stadium, the fans would chant, "Who is your daddy?" over and over, thousands of voices in unison, mocking him, reminding him of his failure, turning his moment of honesty into a weapon against him. It became the soundtrack of his rivalry with New York, a constant reminder that the Yankees owned him in the moments that mattered most. But by 2026, something remarkable has happened. Pedro has reclaimed that narrative entirely. He now hosts a weekly segment on TNT Sports titled, "Who is Your Daddy?" The segment highlights the top performer of the week in Major League Baseball. It is playful, it is confident. It is proof that he no longer needs to defend himself against old insults. He owns them now. He has taken the weapon that was used to hurt him and turned it into part of his professional identity. The transformation from defensive pitcher to comfortable analyst is complete. The taunt that once wounded him is now a signature part of his brand. In October 2025, Pedro signed a multi-year extension with TNT Sports. The deal keeps him on studio coverage through at least 2028. It is a significant commitment from both sides. TNT Sports values his perspective and his personality. Pedro values the platform because it gives him something he never had as a player: the ability to be himself without the constant pressure of performance. He works alongside analysts like Jimmy Rollins and Curtis Granderson. The broadcast studio is a space of teamwork and collaboration, something he contrasts sharply with the isolation of the pitching mound. On the mound, it was him against the world. Every pitch was his responsibility. Every mistake was his fault. Every loss felt personal. In the studio, it is different. It is collaborative. He can share ideas. He can learn from other people. He can express opinions without the weight of having to back them up with physical performance. He gets to express himself in English or Spanish, switching between languages depending on the audience and the moment. This bilingual flexibility allows him to be a bridge between Latin American players and the English-speaking audience. He mentors younger players who remind him of himself, players who came from nothing, players who are trying to navigate a system that does not always understand their background. He uses his platform to tell their stories, to give them context, to help fans understand that success in baseball is often about more than talent. It is about survival, about overcoming obstacles that most people never see. The media role suits him in ways that pitching never could. He is known for his one-of-a-kind personality and his contagious love for the game. People enjoy watching him because he is genuine. He does not hide behind corporate speak or rehearsed answers. He says what he thinks. He shares his emotions. He lets people see the real person behind the legend. But the biggest change in his life is not happening on camera. It is happening on his estates in Miami, Georgia, and the Dominican Republic. Pedro calls himself a gardener first. He is proud of his obsession with his land. Gardening is his moment to relax, his own space, his escape from the pressure that defined his playing career. It is where he finds peace in a way that trophies and awards never provided. On his Dominican estate, Pedro maintains over 1,000 chickens and numerous geese. He produces everything he eats while he is there. The goal is organic food, no chemicals, no processed diets. He wants control over what goes into his body after years of eating whatever was available during the season. His mother was a farmer, and he has come full circle. He employs his uncles and cousins to help manage the land. It is a family operation now, a way of giving back to the people who supported him when he had nothing. The roses are particularly significant. Pedro grows them as a tribute to his mother. The act of tending to plants is therapeutic for him. It is biological therapy for the stress and scars of a career spent in combat mode. Every rose he plants is a reminder of where he came from and how far he has traveled. The gentle farmer persona is not an act. It is not a public relations strategy. It is a genuine reconciliation with the past. The man who once used his arm as a weapon now uses his hands to nurture life. The fire on the mound has been replaced by the quiet growth of his gardens. The aggression has been replaced by patience. The need to dominate has been replaced by the desire to cultivate. But the most profound transformation is happening in Managuayabo itself, the place where it all started. The Pedro Martinez Foundation was established in 1998. By 2026, it has served over 200,000 youth across 56 communities in the United States and Latin America. The flagship project is an education and sports campus in the Dominican Republic. The facility is designed to provide holistic care for 1,700 children every single day. As of early 2026, funding has been secured for 16 out of 17 planned buildings. The campus includes a community health center that provides free emergency care, pediatric consultations, dental services, and medications to the broader community. There is a computer lab where children can learn technology skills, a library filled with books, a technical training center where adolescents can learn trades that will help them find jobs. The goal is to address the exact vulnerabilities Pedro faced as a child: lack of education, poor health services, the lure of environments that trap kids in poverty and offer no way out. The foundation runs a winter giving campaign every year. In 2026, a dedicated team participated in the Boston Marathon to raise funds for the final gap in the medical and dental complex. Pedro's personal investment in the project started in 2002, when he had donated his own land for the campus. It is a decades-long effort to ensure that the next generation does not have to live on dirt floors, that they do not have to choose between sports and starvation, that they have options he never had. This is what it looks like when a man refuses to let the past repeat itself. Pedro grew up in a home where survival was the only question, where every day was uncertain, where hope felt like a luxury his family could not afford. Now he is building a campus where 1,700 children can focus on education instead of hunger, where they can dream instead of just surviving. The transformation is not symbolic. It is not a charitable hobby. It is structural change. He is changing the economic reality of Managuayabo one child at a time, one building at a time, one opportunity at a time. The money that makes all of this possible came from an 18-year career in Major League Baseball. Pedro earned approximately $146 million in base salary across his playing years. His peak earning year was 2004 when he made $17.5 million. Adjusted for inflation, that is about $25 million in 2024 dollars. By 2026, his net worth is estimated between $70 and $85 million. The wealth is diversified and managed conservatively. He has media contracts with TNT Sports and TBS that bring in steady income. He made significant profits from the sale of a Miami waterfront mansion in 2023 for $5.3 million. He has endorsement deals with global brands like Nike and Pepsi, as well as partnerships with local Dominican enterprises. He also serves as a special assistant to the Red Sox general manager, a role that keeps him connected to the team that gave him his greatest success. But the money is not the point of his story. The money is just the tool that allows him to do what matters. The point is that Pedro Martinez came from nothing, from a tin roof home with dirt floors, from a place where failure meant staying trapped forever. He threw rocks across a ravine and used doll heads as baseballs because that was all he had. He pitched through stabbing back pain to maintain dominance in an era that favored hitters. He built a reputation as a headhunter because he refused to let anyone take the inside part of the plate. He made one mistake in 2003 that he still regrets in 2026. And then he walked away from the fire and built something entirely different. The biggest revelation of his story is that the survival engine that made him scary on the mound nearly trapped him as a public villain forever. The same pressure that drove him to excellence also created the controversies that defined his public image. The Zimmer moment was not about cruelty or malice. It was about a man who had spent his entire life defending territory. A man who grew up believing that any sign of weakness meant failure and poverty. A man who learned early that the world would dismiss you if you did not project strength and dominance. Every confrontation on the field was an echo of that childhood lesson. Every aggressive pitch was a reminder that backing down was never an option. But Pedro is not frozen in that image anymore. He is not the angry young man the cameras captured in 2003. He has done the work to become someone different, someone better. He is a broadcaster who mentors younger players and helps them navigate the challenges of professional sports. He is a gardener who grows roses for his mother and finds peace in the soil. He is a farmer who raises over 1,000 chickens and produces everything he eats on his own land. He is a philanthropist who funds a campus for 1,700 children in the town where he grew up. He is a man who transformed survival pressure into restoration and healing. The true ending of Pedro Martinez's story is not sad at all. The sad part was the beginning. The dirt floors and the tin roof. The win or starve pressure that defined his childhood. The feeling that your right arm is the only tool that can save your family from poverty. The physical pain that came with dominance and excellence. The controversies that built a reputation he never wanted. The label that stuck after one regrettable moment. Those things were sad. Those things were hard. Those things left scars that he still carries today. But the ending is something else entirely. It is hopeful. It is peaceful. It is proof that people can change. The ending is a man at peace with himself and his past. A man who turned the Karate Kid insult into a successful broadcasting career. A man who reclaimed the daddy taunt and made it his own signature segment. A man who uses nature as therapy and livestock as a form of biological healing. A man who employs his uncles and cousins on the same land his mother once farmed, bringing it all full circle. A man who donated his own property in 2002 to build a future for kids who remind him of himself. In 2026, Pedro Martinez wakes up on his Dominican estate and tends to his gardens before the sun gets too hot. He feeds his chickens and checks on his geese. He grows his own food and avoids chemicals and processed products. He controls his environment in a way he never could as a child growing up in Managuayabo. Then he goes to the studio and talks about baseball, with people he respects and enjoys. He expresses himself in 2 languages. He mentors the next generation of players. He bridges cultural gaps between Latin America and the United States. And when he is done with his media work, he goes back to the land and the quiet satisfaction of growing things instead of destroying them. The fire on the mound is gone now. The grimace that terrified hitters is gone. The stare that made grown men flinch is gone. What remains is a man who survived poverty and doubt and pain and controversy and came out the other side with clarity about who he is and what he wants. He knows who he is now. He knows what he has built. He knows that the angry label was never the full story. It was just the part the cameras caught in one terrible moment. The real story is about a boy from Managuayabo who threw rocks across a ravine and dreamed of something better than dirt floors. A boy who turned that dream into 3 Cy Young Awards and a World Series championship ring. A boy who made mistakes along the way and carried regret, but refused to let those mistakes define the rest of his life. A boy who grew into a man who plants roses and raises chickens and funds a campus for 1,700 children who deserve better than the poverty he escaped. That is not a sad ending. That is redemption. That is transformation. That is healing. That is a man who rewrote his own story on his own terms. That is a man who turned survival into dominance and then turned dominance into peace. That is Pedro Martinez in 2026. And the truth is not dark at all. It is bright. It is calm. It is exactly what restoration looks like when you refuse to stay frozen in the worst moment the cameras ever captured. When you refuse to let one regrettable moment define decades of growth and change. If this story meant something to you, hit the like button right now. Subscribe to the channel so you do not miss more stories like this one that matter. Drop a comment and let us know what you think about Pedro's journey from Managuayabo to peace. And remember, the hype feature helps stories like this reach the people who need them most. Thanks for watching.